Hi, and welcome to the Improvisors podcast. I'm Neil Thomas. This is my co-host, Kevin James. This podcast is about improvisation by improvisers for improvisers.
And Neil and I are thoroughly enjoying chatting with improvisers about the origins of their practice, about their approach to improvising, and about the details of what is keeping them interested and alive in their performance life now.
And today's guest is none other than NIKKI HEYWOOD. Oh. Good morning, NIKKI.
Hello there, lovely gentleman.
NIKKI HEYWOOD. I guess the place to start might be a potted history of you and improvisation and performance.
Okay, all right. Well, I've been thinking about this and thinking, when did it all begin? I won't go into my high school musical days and etc. But I think I really started to engage with improvisation in a way probably unlike the impro that all of us engage with at this point in time, or the Melbourne impro scene, let's say, which was also happens in Sydney. But in the late 70s, I started working with this pretty crazy group of people. It was an offshoot of Theatre Research Group that had been working out of Armidale. This crazy French guy, Igor Persan. And there's a few Melbourne people who were involved, John Howard and Arpad Mahaley. I don't know if you know those guys. Anyway, we started this little group working in Bellingen, and the training as such was based on Grotowski's method. And we would generate performance through very long improvisations. So we would have a kind of a basic score, maybe, which was based on a text, but we would just kind of let rip for maybe an hour with a group of us, just playing backwards and forwards with maybe what we remembered of the text, or very physical. A lot of that Grotowski stuff is all about impulse, and highly. Well, we took ourselves very seriously. We were so serious, so committed. We did a lot of work outdoors. The thing that I took away from that period, which was so deeply immersive, it was almost like being part of a cult, was a methodology that Igor used, where we would improvise for long stretches of time, and then afterwards, rather than say directing us, oh, we're going to use this bit or this bit, the process was one of asking questions, where I can't actually bring to mind what those questions might be, but they might be just to do with what part of your body is that coming from, or what do you see, or we did a lot of work on our internal landscape. It's a very particular time, I think, in theatre in Australia, that intense, deeply, we took ourselves very seriously. But the asking of questions and that kind of continually opening possibility was what made a lot of sense to me, or, you know, I found very exciting. So that was, late 70s, early 80s. Once that group fell apart, I did a whole bunch of other stuff. I moved back to Sydney, and I ended up doing Suzuki training. You know, it was all about what's the most intense thing that I can do as a physical discipline to I guess to build a craft. You know, I don't know if I would have used those words back then, but there was a feeling that I had for a long period of time, and this stretched through to then working with Tess de Quincey and doing body weather training for a number of years. This idea, I know I'm not really talking about improvisation here, but it's kind of important, I think, as a background, as potted history. And this is what I do write about this in the doctorate, which we might mention later again. But there was this feeling that you couldn't really bear yourself as a performer unless you stripped away everything that you thought you were, or, you know, stripped away habitual gesture or you know, any kind of formulaic approach to generating not necessarily a character, but so there were quite a few years there where my strong belief was the only way that a performer can be real and can be of interest to me, because I had such a lot of opinions about what performing should be, or what made good performance, was that you had to just cane yourself to the point of total exhaustion, so that then you could be, you know, a vessel and vulnerable, and you know, which works for a certain period of time. So then, you know, body weather was fantastic. There was an element of improvisation that we used in generating material there, which, you know, because a lot of what body weather is about is taking an image into your body and allowing that to activate and take shape, you know, finding form through image, which is an ongoing improvisational process. Then I started making my own performance work, and even though I had I'd make a score, but I had a particular I had an approach that I didn't realize until I saw other people performing things that they could repeat over and over again that were exactly the same. And I realized that was really not of interest to me. You know, what I wanted to do was to be able to have a kind of a loose structure that then would change every time. It would grow and shift and, hopefully deepen the contact with whatever material I was engaged with. So it's more like rather than a total dedication at that point to improvisation, it was more that was I guess a really not finding the word, but, it was like it was sort of plugged in there quite deeply as, I guess, in that quest of being real, that which had taken me to a point where I'd worked in text-based theatre, and I reached a point where I thought I'm seeing these words on a page, and I'm trying very hard to bring myself to them and inhabit them, but there just came a point I just didn't feel like I could do that. I didn't, especially, I was a bit of a brat, I think, too, in that at that point. But I just thought, and I think that's what took me away from text altogether for quite a long time. So just working with the body, particularly doing body weather. And I've come a full circle now where I'm working with text again. Then I came into contact with Ros Crisp in the mid-90s, and we started, I don't know, she saw a performance that I did where I was kind of inhabiting the body of my grandmother, and she said something to me like, I'm really interested in this sort of broken, disabled body. That, and so that might not be the exact words, but so we started a studio practice together, and we worked together on and off for I don't know, a couple of years, and she introduced me to authentic movement, and she also introduced me to it kind of inadvertently. It wasn't like I was trying to take on her training, but I saw the way that she prepared her body to perform and realized, oh, God, I don't need to, like jump up and down a gazillion times and run up and down the room and leap and jump and, like tear myself into shreds in order to bring something real to the pot, to the floor. So that was such a revelation to me. Oh, you mean we can just sort of lie on the floor and notice things? Extraordinary. And then I continued that practice of authentic movement through working with Alice Cummins, who moved to Sydney in around 2000, and she and I had a studio practice together for a while. So in the meanwhile, I started generating performance, working more as a director, and the approach that or one of the approaches I really liked to engage with was, setting some kind of loose score or asking a question and letting the performers improvise, often for really long periods of time. And then, taking threads out of what I saw and starting to stitch together a work. So I guess, like I'm a little bit of a cuckoo or something here, because my dedication to improvisation, I think, is perhaps it's not totally pure. For me, it became a tool that I wanted to work with, because I was very interested in making performance, particularly with groups. And then, of course, I met Andrew Morrish, and through Tony Osborne. And at Omeo Studio, he started taking some classes, and suddenly this whole other space of improvisation opened up, which, you know, was such a, it was refreshing, it was delightful, and it was such fun, you know, and it shifted me out of my very serious theatre performance making mode that I've been in for a long time, and I started improvising and realized that people were laughing. And yeah, I didn't realize I could actually be funny, or it hadn't. I mean, I'm not, even now, I don't really often intend to be funny, but I don't know. I that's a kind of mystery to me. I can't. So I might have to digress back a little bit. So part of my history, I guess, is that, well, you know, doing musicals at high school, right? So suddenly I realized, oh, yeah, there is a kind of singing voice there. Then in the early 80s, I found, I don't know how this happened, but I ended up working with a guy called Colin Offord. Does that name ring a bell? And Blair Greenberg, and doing these sound, they were improvised sound performances. You know, we ended up doing festivals and all sorts of stuff. I don't know why I ended up doing that, because, you know, it was like, yeah, Schutzbar, yeah, I can do this. And that was a path that I thought I was really interested in going along, until I got a really bad review, and I thought, oh shit, okay, I better pull back from this, because this, you know, I'm a charlatan. I really don't know what I'm doing. Then later on in the early 90s, I ended up going to some voice festivals where there were Siberian singers and some interesting, you know, sort of John Cage experts and whatever, and just having this whole other influence of how to play with the voice, and how, you know, techniques of working with the voice. I did some stuff with a guy called David Hikes, who was into harmonics, and, you know, started to learn how to do that. Then I heard Maria Callas singing and thought, oh God, I'm going to do that. I'm going to sing opera. So I did about 5 or 6 years of classical training, and I kind of had left it a bit too late. You know, it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to be an opera singer, but it was, you know, it was really useful, foundational way to understand how the voice works. And so, yeah, there has been a quite a lifelong fascination with the voice and what the voice can do. And coming across Roy Hart, who they were based in Europe, in Denmark, I can't remember, or Germany maybe, that introduced me to the idea of singing into the cracks of the voice, and how, you know, again, it was another way of dismantling what we know, or what we think we know, which has always appealed to me. You know, I'm really kind of, I guess I'm into deconstruction. So I left all that alone for a while in, I guess in the 2000s, And then I decided I was, because it was getting hard to, to get funding and to keep a practice really going, I decided to do a doctorate. And in the sort of the concept or the underpinning of what I wanted to do in that was to have a look at how a performer could I was interested in what visual artists do, and I got really jealous about how they could actually make a work and it would be outside of themselves, and that, they could step away from it. And I think I was really entangled with my own subjectivity, and and the whole, in the dance scene, of course, it's all about people looking at you. And in the improv scene, it's all about people looking at you. And I wanted to find a way to perform where I was still present, but it wasn't about looking at me. It was about looking at the thing that I was interested in. So I began this series called Museum of the Sublime. And what eventuated was that I would go into a studio and I would just look around and I would find something in the studio, and it was a piece of rope, or it was the rock, or very luckily I came across this fantastic head that it looked like a deer, but it was actually, I think, a donkey from a Midsummer Night's Dream production. So I started working with that, which was perfect, because I thought, yeah, great, I'm just going to work with masks. I'm going to disappear. I'm going to, shift it away from me, Nikki Haywood, the performer, to some, sort of something else. Which is all about dealing with discomfort, I think, as a performer. And that, like just thinking about improvisation and the discomfort of improvisation, I just think, God, we're such masochists, aren't we? Like it's really, and, people who don't do it say, God, how the hell do you get up there and you don't know what you're going to do? Like, how do you do that? And, sometimes we deal better with that discomfort than others. I don't know what it is that allows us to, of course, there's practice, but the whole project of writing a doctorate and doing this series was all about looking at the discomfort of the performer and looking at my whole history about how the performer prepares in order to, it's there in the title, being real, becoming other. Because, that's, for me, what it's really all been about. It's about, when I see someone performing, I don't necessarily want to see them. I want to see what's coming through them or what they're becoming. And that's really, I guess, fundamentally what I try and do when I perform, is I try and step aside somehow, so that, it's a ridiculous project in a sense, because you're always there, like that crazy idea that Well, no, it does happen. It does happen.
Nikki, that the point that you're just touching on there, and I think most improvisers talk about this to some degree and maybe language it in different ways, but how to become in some ways available, how to become available to emergent material. At the best, it feels a little like we're maybe a conduit for something forming. And as you said, that maybe stepping out of the way, that we step out of the way so that something may then appear and emerge and become. And could you keep talking a little bit more about that from your point of view, your perspective, and what you've found, both in your doctoral reflections as well as in your performance practice?
Okay. So maybe I can talk about that in relation to bringing back the voice and the use of language, because it happened almost by default, where I was working with objects, moving them around the space, and then I realized I needed to actually start talking about them and what they were, or giving some sort of insight. And during this whole process, I started working with, really love the double bass. So I started working with a double bass player. And through that bringing in of language, of course, I started working just with pure sound as well, with vocal sound. There's also a process in there where I've used like an improvisational kind of approach to actually writing. So, you know, I guess that's where I think improvisation is such a broad term to cover. Like, I'm improvising right now. I think every time we have a conversation, we're improvising. So when I can prepare myself in such a way to be available, then I'm really interested in what happens when I start writing, because stuff pours onto the page. I'm sure, you know, I see you guys nodding. You know, you obviously have an experience of this, that stuff just arrives on the page that you had no idea about, and that there's something in there about how when we're in that mode, when something's coming, like how to keep it going, how to actually commit to it and give it permission to continue. And that's something I think I struggle with quite a lot both as a writer and as a performer, that something massive will start kind of arriving energetically, which is sometimes a bit sort of scary and monstrous. And to keep the little voice at bay that goes, "Oh, Wangal, that's way too much. You can't," you know, like, and there's that push-pull of, are they with me or are they freaked right out? I'm talking about the audience, you know, and do I want to continue to freak them right out? So will I keep doing this, or will I pull it back and transform? And I think, or, you know, divert. And I think that's where other practices step in, you know, say the stuff that Roz talks about really well, which is, you know, when I'm noticing something's happening, and so I'm going to abandon that and direct my attention somewhere else and let something else happen. And I think I got really interested in doing that. Sorry, I'm going to have a bit of water. I got really interested in doing that as not just as a physical practice, but as a whole performance practice with voice and sound and text, which is a little bit like sort of playing free jazz, where I don't really try and generate something that people can follow the logic of. In fact, I'm really interested in constantly disrupting the logic, which, you know, might be, I don't know, that maybe that's a kind of cowardly thing, because it means that I don't go, yes, this is the thing. But yeah, I guess it's an avoidance of dogma as well. You know, like I don't want to be an expert on anything really. I just want to play with ideas.
I just have to bust in here. Just listening to you, Nikki, there is such a resonance for me around everything you're saying, and it just really makes my heart sing. It's actually interesting how it's just pumping, because I'm so there with you around so much of what you're saying, and it's such a vast. Your sort of investigations have been so vast and so broad, and that the kind of a lifetime of amalgamating the things that you've learned, including your sort of childhood musicals, how that returns into this pot, and you know, like such an organic growth and exploration of skills and performance and the self through life and through the work. And particularly, we often talk about putting the self aside, and that what that might mean. And I really am virtually addicted to the idea of getting rid of myself, and you know, what a complexity in that. But I was wondering whether you had a tip on how to reach the holy grail that all creators are seeking, which is how to put that self aside and enter into the zone, writing, performing, being. It's a big ask.
Hang on, I'll just get out. I'm gonna just sort of come in sideways on that, because what you said there about getting rid of the self, I think you might find this amusing, but I did have a whole period in the early stage when I started working on my doctorate, where I was really interested in I've always been interested in mythology, and I got really interested in the Gorg and you know, the Medusa, and started thinking about, you know, how to get rid of my head, you know, which is why I started wearing a mask, which was, yeah, like another version of how to get rid of the self. You know, so I went down this, you know, weird, it was a bit of a dead end really, but, you know, working with the headless Medusa. But Look, I mean, I guess that's where finding a way to prepare yourself that works, and that varies. That really changes from over time. But like I said, like it was such a revelation to me that instead of doing a 3-hour MB, which is a body weather thing where you end up, you have to change your clothes because you're sweating so much, that I could lie on the floor and listening to really good music helps. I really love using music as a way just to kind of dissolve myself. And, the strange paradox is that, this is where I've loved working with body mind centering, because that practice of embodied anatomy, where you can go very deeply into your skeletal system, or into into the quality of your own skin, or becoming more inside the body, somehow allows you then to, well, I guess, move into trusting something else. I think, move into trusting your gut, or move into, I mean, the gut's probably the big one for me, trusting my own gut. Something I learnt to talk about through years of therapy as well, it suddenly made sense. Oh, yeah, that's what she's talking about, trusting my own gut. Like, literally, it is about my own embodiment. So, yeah, I don't think it's something that you can decide to do without taking yourself into a practice of some sort, which is why we all practice improvisation, which is so funny in itself, isn't it? I don't know. I haven't answered your question, I know, but like, I just do whatever works. Sorry.
It was really a trick question, Nikki. I think you answered it perfectly. Beautiful.
Nikki, when you speak of a practice, and I'm intrigued by the question that Neil brought before, and that you've been speaking about getting out of our way in some ways, because much of improvisational training, certainly especially in Melbourne for a long time, was being confirmed in our strengths, being confirmed in what we were, and bringing ourselves really into it as the means whereby. But lots of body-based work has been sort of coming from another place, becoming other, and becoming more than we are. And I think this is a place of great intrigue between we are ourselves, and yet we are other than ourselves. And as performers, this is possibly entwined. And some people have a preference to bring more of themselves in, and others have a much stronger preference to bracket that out and find other than themselves and be more of a conduit for what tends to appear. Any more you'd like to say about that in your practice now, as per what you're finding at this time in your practice life?
So what I'm working on now is is how to combine writing with, you know, how to voice my own writing, and how to do that with a collaborator, with a musician, and how to like, you know, the most recent thing that I'm kind of working on is back to, again, disappearing myself, you know, where I'm inviting an audience into a space that might be really dark, and all they're hearing is the sound of the voice, as though it's sort of all around them, but it's you know, I've really taken to that practice of what is it we notice? What are we noticing? And I'm trying to do that particular piece of writing I'm working on is all about taking away subjectivity, or attempting to take away subjectivity. So it's yeah, what is it? I don't know. What is it? When you take away subjectivity, it's something, taking away the I, which I guess is an assumption of some kind of universal observation of what's going on. Does that make sense? You're nodding.
I love things that don't make sense, and yet there's the smell of something other within the words or the presentation. I think I'm a bit like you, Nikki, deeply suspicious of answers. It's actually much more interesting to be in the swim of investigation. But saying that, I think perhaps it's time to wrap up our investigation. Just from myself, thank you so much, Nikki. It's been such a wonderful journey listening to you, and personally so affirming. And I think it will be the same for our audience. Thank you.
Yeah, Nikki, this is such an opportunity to sort of swim in these places that many of us are always considering, but never quite having the opportunity to share, to reflect on, and to keep asking the questions together. It's really such a wonderful opportunity to hear you, to actually have a chance to have a conversation around it. I feel I'd love to go on and on and on and keep swimming. The water's getting warmer and warmer. Thank you so much for today.
Well, yeah, so
thank you so much for today, in the sense that it's, as Neil so clearly said, it's opening up other fields, other worlds of questions, other questions and other domains of exploration, which I guess is a part of continually becoming more. Back to you, Nikki.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, guys. And I'm hoping that you're going to interview each other, so we'll get to hear. Is that going to happen?
Yes.
Good. Good. It's a great project. Thank you.